You got questions? I've got answers. Let's get into it. Hey friends, it's Len here from 1A Auto. So in today's video, we wanted to go over questions and answers. You watch all of our videos and you leave some questions and comments in the comment section. That's great. When I read these questions, I always want to get back to you, but I have to wait for one of these questions and answers videos to be able to come out and do it. One of the questions that I have comes from Sam Lopez. He asked me essentially, where do we get all these cars that we can do the videos on for you? Well, unfortunately, I can't really give you the details on where we get the cars, but I can tell you why we get the cars. Well, we looked into the future a little bit and we could tell that we were going to have an issue trying to get parts to be able to do the installation videos. We also anticipated having an issue trying to find a whole bunch of used cars to make our fun and instructional videos for you guys to be able to see. So 1A Auto decided that they go out and they buy a whole bunch of used cars for us. We're going to park them up in that top lot. Of course, you probably saw the video on a sappy situation where we parked them underneath the trees and of course the sap got all over them. I'm not going to get too much into that because you probably already saw that video, but of course we do have a lot of cars up there for us to go through. So of course I can use my imagination, I can come up with some fun videos, and we can put in a whole bunch of parts into these things so you can see how to do it. So thank you to 1A Auto for getting us all these parts and cars to make you these fun instructional videos, and thank you for the question. Now my second question comes from Nick the Car Guy. Essentially what he's asking me is, where can I get the kit so I can bench bleed my master cylinder? Well, Nick, for me personally, I don't actually have one of those kits. I like to create things on my own because it's kind of like what I like to do. I do have access to automotive parts, so I have a little fitting that I can pretty much put on there. It's going to match up to the master cylinder itself. And then I have some brake line that comes right across like this. Essentially, I just want to form the brake line so it comes up around the outside of the reservoir and then down into the reservoir. So imagine it's sitting up approximately this high and the fluid's right about where my thumb is. The reason why I want to have it set up like this is so that when I'm pumping up that master cylinder or trying to push the fluid through, it's going to force air up and through the line like this and then down and into the fluid. When the air evacuates, it's going to go up and out like this, and when I release that brake pedal, it's going to suck only brake fluid back up into this line and potentially back into the master cylinder. That's how we're going to bench bleed it. Can you get a kit that's going to have every single accessory or adapter that you're going to need to be able to do the master cylinder that you're doing? Yeah, of course you can. It's probably going to cost you a couple bucks, if not a lot of bucks. But if master cylinders are things that you do every day, all day, maybe you work in a shop, well, that's probably something that you're going to want to have. For me personally, if I'm just doing a master cylinder in the driveway or just one every once in a while, it's a lot cheaper just to get myself some brake line and a fitting that fits. Stick with me here. Question number 3. We've got a question from Marshall Border. He's wondering, how often do I need to flush out the brake fluid in my braking system? That's a great question, Marshall. A lot of people don't necessarily think about bleeding or flushing their brake fluid. Most people probably wouldn't even think about changing their oil. Good thing they have that little reminder sticker up on their windshield, which kind of helps them out a little bit. But nobody really has that for their brake fluid. Who thinks about flushing their brake fluid? For brake fluid, you can't actually judge by mileage overall. What you really want to think about is the time that the fluid's been inside your system. Like you said in your question, your vehicle's got approximately 43,000 miles on it, which isn't very many miles, but it is actually 8 years old already. A lot of things can happen over those 8 years. If you live in a humid environment, there's a possibility moisture could have made its way underneath your brake fluid cap, especially if for some reason you checked the fluid, you left it a little loose, or maybe it just wasn't screwed on there tightly or even crooked a little bit. If moisture made its way inside that brake fluid, it's considered contaminated. Moisture has a much lower boiling point than the brake fluid itself. Your brakes overall are going to get very hot, especially if you're using them for severe driving. Maybe you're driving through the city where you speed up and then you have to stop at the street light. The light finally turns green, you speed up again, the next street light turns red, now you gotta stop at that one. At this point, your brakes are getting super hot, or maybe even just drive down a mountain such as maybe Mount Washington or something. We've all seen those stickers that say, "This car climbed Mount Washington." That's great. It also had to drive down Mount Washington, and they probably had to use their brakes the entire way down. At that point, you could potentially be heating up your brake fluid past its boiling point, and you might notice you have a little bit of a brake failure, or your brakes just kind of seem like they're a little bit spongy. If your brakes feel like they're spongy for any reason, you want to make sure that you flush out that brake system. You also want to make sure that you don't have a leak anyplace. If you look at your master and it looks like it's low for any reason, more than likely you have a leak, or for some reason the fluid could be evaporating out of there. If the fluid's evaporating out of there, that means it's very worn out. Also, a good time to flush your braking system is if you're doing something with the hydraulics, such as maybe the master cylinder like I talked about before. You have some brake lines that lead down to some flex hoses, and then those flex hoses either lead to a caliper in the front or sometimes a caliper or a wheel cylinder in the rear. Any of those things that you happen to open up, maybe there was a leak or you're just replacing it due to wear or tear or something the like, you want to make sure that you flush out any of the existing brake fluid that's in the system. It really only makes sense. When you do it, you need to make sure that you flush it out with the manufacturer specified brake fluid. If it calls for .3, you can use .4, but you definitely don't want to use .5. The reason why that is because .3 and .4 brake fluid is hydroscopic, which essentially means it's going to draw in moisture from the environment. So if that cap's left a little bit loose, just the moisture that's floating around the air, or even the moisture that's coming off of me right now because it's a little hot in here, could potentially be getting drawn into that braking system, and of course it's going to contaminate the fluid. .5 brake fluid is hydrophobic, which essentially means if you try to put it in a cup with some water, it's going to just stay separated. It's not necessarily going to mix in all together. So by mixing .3 or 4 with .5 brake fluid, you could potentially have a major braking issue. Now the next question comes from a person named Markson. Essentially, first, they mentioned that they love the videos, they learned a lot. So thank you very much, Markson. I love to hear that. It means everything to me. What their question was, though, is when I'm depressing a caliper, what tool is it that I use? It's called a caliper depression tool, and there's a couple different types. Why would there be a couple different types, and why does it matter? Sometimes you're going to have a caliper with one piston like this right here. To push back this caliper, obviously you could use a tool that looks like this. It's like a little C-clamp plier, and what I would want to do is just come right inside the center right here, and then slowly depress that caliper piston in. Now a tool like this can work great for a single piston caliper. It can also work for a dual piston caliper. Now for the dual piston caliper, I could use this tool and I could try to go like this, but if I was to press in one piston at a time, it's probably going to try to push out the other piston. So if you had this tool right here, you could just use one of your old brake pads. Definitely don't use a new one if you're going to be replacing them. Just go ahead and put it in there like this, and then come right in the center and then squeeze in both pistons at the same time. So that's how you would use this caliper depressor. But if you have a quad piston caliper or a caliper that has 4 pistons or more, using this isn't necessarily going to work because you're going to have 4 pistons that need to push in at the same time. Essentially, you'll have 2 pistons that come along this side right here, and you're going to have 2 pistons that are on the other side right there. Now, these type of calipers aren't really very common unless you have like a more expensive or a specialty car. You'll see it a lot of times on like a Corvette or a performance type vehicle that needs heavy braking. So using this caliper depression tool isn't necessarily going to work right for that because like I said, you have to push in all the pistons at the same time. Now there's another type of tool that you can use that looks just like this. When I try to turn it, it's going to essentially push out both these sides at the same time, and it'll be able to push in the pistons all at the same time. As I continue doing this, you can tell that it continues to spread until the point that all 4 pistons, or 6 pistons, whatever you might happen to have, are pressing in at the same time. Can you use this as opposed to using this on any caliper? Yeah, you can. You can use this depression tool right inside this single piston caliper right here and push in the piston just like you would with any other caliper piston. So if you could only buy one tool, I would go with this one right here over this one. Now my last question comes from Robert Colazzo. Essentially what he's asking me is when you're replacing the struts, is there a difference between the left or the right and how can you tell? A lot of times on struts, what you're going to probably notice is when you try to order them, they may or may not have the same part number. A lot of times on your strut, if you're trying to order them, it has the same part number for left or right. That means that it's interchangeable, but more commonly, they're not necessarily going to be interchangeable. So you're probably going to see that they probably have 2 different numbers. You're probably going to wonder which one's the left and which one's the right. Sometimes on the strut, you might be lucky enough to find a marking or a sticker that tells you front left or front right. But a more common way of telling which strut is which, left or right, would be the fact that it's probably going to have some sort of mounting point located on one side of the strut, whether it's for a sway bar link or maybe even a flex hose of some sort. Generally, you're going to have something that mounts onto the strut, and if it does, it's going to have a bracket that's located either on the left or the right. So essentially, you just want to hold it up to the vehicle, take a look, and see where that sway bar link or the flex hose is mounted, and match it up. Another way that you might be able to tell if it's left or right is looking at the top, right up along the strut cap. This is the area that's going to mount to the body of the vehicle itself. Sometimes these holes aren't necessarily going to match up. If you try to put the right one on the left side, you might notice that the holes for some reason are a little bit oblonged. 2 of them line up, but the other one doesn't. If that's the case, go ahead and try it on the other side of the car, and you probably figured out where it's supposed to go. Now, thank you very much for that question, Robert. It's a great question because struts are something that a lot of people tend to do on their own in their driveway. It's something that you want to make sure that you're being as safe as possible, and when you do your struts, make sure you get yourself a 4-wheel alignment when you're done. I hope you liked the video. I hope you learned a little something. If you did, and you want to talk about it, leave it in the comments section below, especially if you have another question from me. I love to read them, and who knows, maybe it'll end up in the next questions and answers video that I do. I hope you liked the video. If you did, smash on the like button for me. It would mean the world. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe, ring the bell. That way there you can be kept up with all of our latest content. Thanks. Want to start it again?
Sure.
Loop. Well, battery. And sometimes they're going to be oblong. Are they even? I didn't even look at them. I just assumed. Did I say it? I forgot to say share the video!